I'm Aishwarya Giri, a master's student of International Relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and also one of your hosts for today. When I came to the UK, a friend told me, "Congrats, you are now the unofficial ambassador of our country." Back then, it was good humor, but as I stand here today, I realize the role youth play in enhancing the interest of our country and creating a good global image. So, I'm excited to lead us to our next session, Youth's Role in Global Transformation Through Diplomacy, that seeks to analyze the role young diplomats play in shaping present global politics. Let's listen to this young, diverse panel. Today we have Ms. Alexina Phiri, Ministerial Programs Lead, Department of Business and Trade UK, Mr. Al-Khairalla, First Secretary, Embassy of Iraq, and former President of Young Diplomats, London, Ms. Koyesha Mukherjee, Senior Policy Advisor, Department of Business and Trade UK, and Ms. Dona Pabasara, Kannangara, Program Manager, Commonwealth Secretariat, Youth Wing. To moderate the session, we have Mr. Mauro Bonavita, who is a PhD researcher in international relations at King's College London. He is also the founding member of the Indo-Pacific Research Group at King's and visiting fellow at the National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi. He has taught in the Department of War Studies and the Department of Political Economy, and his research largely focuses on maritime strategies and naval diplomacy. Please give them a huge round of applause.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel. Thank you very much to the Nehru Center for hosting us and to the India Global Forum for adding this important confrontation about diplomacy and youth in their programs today. So today, this afternoon, we're going to discuss about the role of the youth in diplomacy. When we think about diplomacy, sometimes we think about, and the news, unfortunately, remind us every day the importance of diplomacy to avoid conflicts. Or we think about the beautiful buildings in where embassies are. In Delhi, there's this fantastic district of Chanakyapuri, where most of the foreign embassies exist. But the truth is that diplomacy is the everyday practice of states relating to each other, of bridging diversity, creating connections, supporting national goals and businesses, creating the opportunity for people to come together to understand each other's cultures. So today we are trying to explore this with the excellent panels that we have put together, and thank you all for joining us again. I would start with a very basic question, just to break the ice, so that then we can move to something more substantial. Let's start with the idea of what is a diplomat today? What is a diplomat for you? What is your personal experience in this world? Let us start with Alexina. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question, and really great to be here to see so many young people in the audience. And I think the question you asked, that what is diplomacy today? For me, it's really moved away from it being about government to government or state to state. It's really about us as young people communicating with one another, connecting. We've already spoken a lot about how the world has changed using technology. Seeing so many of you guys out here studying the course, what I really want you guys to do is connect with one another. That is diplomacy. You don't have to actually be part of a foreign office or working with the government. You can actually be doing that sort of work now. So utilize UK and India Week to establish those networks, create those relationships, find those areas of shared interests and values, and start working together to really make that impact. I mean, we've really spoken a lot about India having one of the biggest populations in terms of young people. Let us actually really start to utilize those connections, those expertise. And I'm seeing in the audience, and I've been hearing a lot of all of you guys coming from really great universities. So yeah, I think like diplomacy today is pretty much what you guys want to make it and connecting with one another. Yeah.
Thank you for this. And you touch upon very interesting points that we'll have the chance to debate more in this discussion. Koyesha, what about you?
Thank you for the question, firstly, and honestly, really great to see so many young people here in the audience. I think for me, diplomacy is really relationship building. It comes from a point of empathy. It's about how you build those connections and networks, like my former panelist already mentioned. I think it's about how you nurture understanding and really a sense of building those connections in terms of how you really understand a different person's perspective. I think it's an art, really, of understanding humans and how you take it to the next level of then, at a kind of macro level, understanding politics and building those relationships with other country governments. For example, in my job, I've got to talk a lot with ministers from other countries and kind of building those connections as UK is signing all of these free trade deals for the first time. So it's really kind of new patch. And the main job that I do there is not just negotiate those trade deals and get a great deal for the UK. It's also about building those connections and making sure that the UK is able to forge new uncharted territories and really maintain a network of good connections around the world.
No, thank you for this. Connections. Again, we go back to these K words. Very important. Thank you. Dona, what about you? What's your experience of diplomacy?
Thank you, Mauro, and thank you to the organizers as well for kindly extending an invitation for me to join at this panel here today. So I think, I'll just give you a quick sort of overview in terms of my work. So I actually work in youth development in the Commonwealth Secretariat. So as an intergovernmental body, we constantly engage with our 56 member states. We have stakeholders from international organizations, civil society, even down to sort of community level, grassroots level organizations as well. So I think, as my panelists have already echoed, I think definitely expanding your network is really important, sort of fostering those strong partnerships, but from a youth perspective, also advocating for co-creation in those spaces, and essentially asking for these leaders to create a space for young leaders to be considered as development partners, so equal partners in development. And I think through that aspect and through that approach, I feel like results tend to be better in the sense that project outcomes are stronger and more impactful. And in my experience as well, some of the solutions that are put forward tend to be more sustainable as well. So yeah, thank you, Mauro.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us these points. Ali, what about you? Last but not least.
Yes. First, I'd like to thank the IGF for thinking I'm still young. I think I'm growing a little bit older, but I believe age is just a number, and it's what's in the heart that really matters. I'm going to take a different take for diplomacy. As an accredited diplomat here in London, I came here in 2019, coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Iraq. We need to get out of the stereotype that we think diplomats are political science majors, or they have a specific political study background when becoming a diplomat. You have to understand, for me, for example, I studied in the US, I got accepted into electrical computing engineering, and I had a minor in business administration. And I used my minor in business administration to apply for the Foreign Service Institute. And I used those skill sets to improve myself as a diplomat within the ministry. So what that tells you today is that for you to become something or someone, it doesn't require you to have the education background that's required. It needs for you to have the persistence and the leadership skills to lead. And first and foremost, it's to network. I believe when I came here in 2019, becoming vice president of the Young Diplomats in London, and we represented around 2,000 diplomats here, that was the main idea, just to try to get diplomats together. And it wasn't only diplomats, it was diplomats and friends. So yourselves, you can be invited to these networking events, and you would sit and talk with other diplomats and try to get a better understanding of how things work. And I think that is the main concept, is that the bigger your network is, the more you can rely on these people down the road to achieve what you want to achieve in terms of your goals.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing this with us, Ali. I think what is common from all your intervention is this idea of connection. Diplomacy is very much about this, connecting with people, talking, interacting. Now, we live in an age, and that was part of a previous intervention, where technology plays a very important role into this. People are more and more interconnected through social media. We are all exposed to the web, but also other type of technologies play a role in this. This brings opportunities, but also risks and limits. And we have to balance it very much. So I would like to ask you, from your own point of view, as you live everyday diplomacy and you actually practice it, what impact does technology has on your work, and especially you as young people? How do you interact with technology? Should we start with Koyesha? Would you like to go first?
Sure. I think that's a great question, really, and really pertinent to the times that we are living in. I think for me, as someone who is a senior policy advisor, negotiating trade deals, implementing trade policy, for the first time in the history of the United Kingdom since Brexit, it's a really new journey and something that the UK government is doing for the first time, really, without any set precedents. And that obviously comes with its own challenges and uncertainty. But I think what has made this easier is enabling technology or kind of digital negotiations, if we may call it so. So obviously, thanks to COVID, given that my job is quite travel-based, none of the travels really happened in the last couple of years. And so what that meant is basically conducting all of these negotiations online. And I think what that really enables is reaching out to different countries around the world, reaching out to a larger audience, and enabling those connections again, because they otherwise wouldn't have happened. We couldn't have just stalled our work because of COVID and not really proceeded with these important trade agreements and their implementation. So what really enabled them again was the digital advantage that we had. And I think while we are talking about the benefits of interacting digitally with our partner country governments around the world, there are also risks and some kind of drawbacks when it comes to security these days, as we are all aware. So we do have to take extra precautions and extra steps to make sure that we are doing these negotiations, for example, in a secure environment and things like that. It's not always easy. There are security breaches, and that does cause a lot of chaos. But there's always a way of dealing around them, I guess. But I think the bottom line, the point that I'm trying to make here is that technology has definitely enabled my job, and I'm probably speaking for all youth in diplomatic positions here, to say how this has made our work easier. The government is obviously within a budget. We can't always spend the money. So that reduces the travel costs. We don't need to travel out anymore, even if we are out of COVID, for example. We can continue to do our work digitally. So I think that basically makes us feel more connected and enables us to reach out to our target audience more easily than what we could have done, for example, 10 years back from now. So I think the advantages here definitely outweigh any potential threats and risks that we face while being digitally connected as diplomats.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing with us through the opportunity that not just at the time of COVID, but still continues. You're very much right about this and the risks. What about, I would like to ask also to involve the others on this, what about social media? How important are they? So, Dona, would you like to go next? What about your point of view?
So I think in terms of my personal experience, Mauro, I think, if I may, I would like to sort of talk a bit more about the technological barriers that we actually tend to face. Because, in the youth department where I work specifically, where, as I said earlier, engaging with different member states that are at very different capacities. So they vary in terms of level of development and resourcing and capacity. And so when we are, engaging with them virtually, what I, tend to find as a challenge is how do we remain sort of inclusive in our approach so that no one is left behind, in a sense. And so in a sense, the Secretariat has done many things. So in terms of empowering these stakeholders, there's a lot of sort of training capacity involved. Very recently, the Secretariat partnered with Intel to sort of launch an e-learning course for public sector officials on digital readiness, which I think is very, very relevant to kind of address that challenge. To promote AI and so on, as well as as technology kind of advances, but also to promote digital inclusivity as well as a key theme there. And from the youth perspective, it's very apparent that there are still this digital skills gap. It's across the Commonwealth. It's still very much there, even post-COVID. And it really hinders young people from engaging in their economies and their societies in a very meaningful way. And while our programmatic work does sort of address those concerns, I think it's really important to kind of highlight the power of partnerships as well there, because it helps us really engage and address those problems and those issues in a more impactful and a more large-scale way. So very recently, we partnered with Simplilearn, which is an Indian company, who have an amazing e-learning platform to roll out about 10,000 digital scholarships there. So it's been a very, it's an interesting space to work in. I guess it's an interesting time to work in as well, but I think it's very important to be cognizant of the fact that while we're advancing, while technology is evolving at a rate, technological barriers still do exist, and I think we should continue to advocate for digital inclusivity in our approach as we move forward as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Inclusivity and opening and try to overcome these barriers. Very, very important. No, thank you for this. Ali, what about in your experience? What role does technology play for you?
I think for young diplomats in general, or youth leaders, and I'm sure everyone here that took the time to come on the weekend, I consider you all leaders because you're actually taking that step forward. I had a panel the other day. We spoke about AI, and we were discussing that. And a lot of people were saying that AI was based on data sets and algorithms. So to add to what the professor also said, the main idea is to document your work. Whatever you do as a project, or as, let's say, for example, an event or an idea, you need to promote the work that you do. That is what's important in diplomacy. The idea that you have to show what you are doing. Because no one's going to come and be like, oh, yes, I remember, Ali, yeah, you're good. If you don't show your work, you don't document what you're doing, and you have all these social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all these different mediums that you can use, LinkedIn, to promote yourself. And I think that is the crucial key point. I remember when I started here, I didn't have a Twitter account because it wasn't very common in Iraq. I opened a Twitter account here. Right away, I started to post and promote about my country, events that we were doing. I was posting more than the embassy, okay? And then I started, getting surprised that I had, previous foreign ministers that were here in the UK started following me, and more. So you have to promote yourself. You have to make sure that data about your country, about your work is out there on the internet, because once it's there forever. So I think this is a key point that we need to focus on.
No, thank you for this. So connection, partnership, promotion, all very important when it comes to diplomacy and, as we say, to technology coming together. What's your keyword, Alexia?
Yeah, I think everybody here has raised some really good points. And I'm lucky being last because you mentioned almost everything. But I worked at the Foreign Office from between 2018 to 2021. And technology really became an effective tool in terms of negotiating and getting host governments, different governments, to actually listen to what you want to do. So it's kind of like you have backdoor diplomacy where you can actually tell the host government a different message, or then tell them that, okay, we actually plan to tweet A, B, C, D, F, G, if this doesn't go ahead, and everybody will know about it. So it's this thing where everyone is so scared that they're going to be on an international stage, especially now all politicians are using Twitter to spread, awareness of different issues, to tag people on different issues, to really highlight different things that people are unhappy about. So right now, I think the way we are using technology, it's really in a way that's evolved in the last 5 years, especially as my colleagues have mentioned, after COVID, it's become one of those things where it's making a bigger impact than we've ever imagined. We're actually moving away from the formal ways of communicating and utilizing social media to really get results. And I think that's where I do see the future of technology taking that leap that way.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this with us. As you said, indeed, Twitter is becoming more and more popular, but there are also other platforms. Sometimes you have the impression that Twitter might need more diplomacy than it actually does, but still it's a very immediate way to interact. And as you say, it brings also responsibilities, because you have to be very much careful about this. Let us move a little bit more on the experience of the young diplomats in a multilateral context. So this forum is about the United Kingdom and India working together, but of course it's not just a bilateral. The United Kingdom and India work together in many different forums. We think about the United Nations, we think about, for example, other elements, and obviously the Commonwealth is very much one of them. So let me start from you, Dona, with this question about how does a young diplomat leave a multilateral context? And what type of enrichment does it bring to a young diplomat to work in this kind of context?
Sure, thanks, Mauro. So, putting on my youth development hat again, in terms of young diplomats sort of engaging in these spaces, I think it can be a very fruitful and rewarding experience. For instance, in the Commonwealth, we have an entire program dedicated to youth participation, which focuses on empowering young people, young leaders to engage very meaningfully in these platforms. So not only does young leaders really bring innovative ideas and fresh perspectives, but also a sense of urgency and energy into that space, which can sometimes be missing, but is very much needed. And as young people also, in my view, I think are one of the biggest stakeholders. I mean, in the Commonwealth, they account for about 60% of our collective population. And as we heard earlier today, several regions in South Asia, even in India, for instance, of course, there's a very prominent youth bulge. And as a key stakeholder, I think young leaders need to be in those spaces to really ensure that even the policies and the programs that have been put forward and developed are reflective of their needs as well. And finally, with these platforms, I mean, we have so many at this moment. We have the Y20 coming up. We have the Commonwealth Youth Forum coming up next year alongside CHOGM. And these avenues are an excellent way to really influence decision makers in ensuring that development remains equitable and inclusive, but also to really leverage those platforms to facilitate an exchange of ideas, good practices, and to really inspire one another to want to build a better future as well.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for this. And you rightly mentioned the G20. This year, India is hosting it. It's a very important event, not just for India, but obviously for the entire world. We saw how the G20 has evolved in the last few years and obviously is now addressing many issues which go much beyond global economic governance. Let me bring you in, Ali, with your personal experience about this. You were vice president of this group of young diplomats. What's your opinion that young people who wants to interact with diplomacy can get from multilateral environments?
So for us, the perspective, I remember coming in 2019, getting elected as vice president, and then maybe a year after as president of the Young Diplomats in London. It was a very difficult time because we were going through COVID. So we tried to find many solutions to try to get, networking together. We couldn't have any forums like we do today, which is indoors. So I remember we had a diplomatic bike ride. So basically we went around London biking, and then we had Taj Hotel host us at the courtyard of the hotel itself. So that was one event. We had several picnics. So we had to always think outside the box to try to get everyone networking together. And it was a sigh of relief because at the time, when we were working, and probably also my colleagues over here, panelists, it was just getting to a level where all these online meetings and Zoom meetings was getting to its limits. So that was, a fresh breath of air. But it helped. It helped to connect a lot of diplomats together. And even when 2019, when we didn't have that many events, YDL was probably the only organization that was still growing compared to the other organizations that were here in London.
No, thank you. Thank you for this. We get a very important one, the relief. So how these opportunities were a relief, not just because of COVID, but also probably because connecting with other people. Alexina, what's your personal impression of working in this international environment?
No, thank you for that question. I actually absolutely agree with what the professor mentioned. I think it's really important to find your cause and your area of interest. What I do find with diplomacy, there's a lot of different areas which you can get into: climate change, insecurity, etc. But you have to be able to find what you're passionate about and really start looking for experiences that draw you to that. Get mentors, find people on LinkedIn that you can actually ask questions about. We've spoken a lot about technology, so when you're trying to get into that area, don't shy away from connecting with others that you don't know. But when you are connecting with these people, make sure you're specific in your asks, and also make sure that you're also able to offer something in return. And in that way, you actually do find people willing to help you. I also agree with the fact that documenting your work, the work that you're doing, that also really does help. So yeah, like for example, myself, I am very interested in gender and ensuring that equality. I'm Malawian born, so I've grown up in a multicultural environment. So having to navigate between the two countries really made me realize the inequalities that women do face. And I funded my own charity, Dona Foundation, worked with Twitter UK to deliver a book. So that sort of work, putting that out there really is also part of diplomacy and will help you in terms of applying for jobs. You have something that people can look into and say, okay, this person does know what they're doing, does know what they're talking about, and they have a clear ambition in this particular area rather than just the travel. The travel is great, but there's a lot of work when you're at the Foreign Office or also in any government department or any area that you do go into. But yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for this and for underlying this aspect of multilateralism, coming together with different cultures, and the fact that this audience is so diverse, and there are so many women, it's also a sign of hope, probably, for the future. Thank you for this. Let me invite you, Koyesha, to share with us your opinions about this.
Absolutely. I think there are two dimensions with which I would approach this question. The first one would be about the fragmentation, actually, between policy making and policy implementation. And I think especially in a multilateral context, there's never going to be one story that we can sell. There has to be several perspectives that we adopt to actually solve the numerous challenges that today's world is facing. So I think also keeping in mind the kind of outcomes of previous Y20 summit and leadership summits, the number of hours that actually goes into negotiating some of these policies, and when it's actually implemented in practice, there seems to be a gap. And I think that's where our youth should step in to make sure that what we are agreeing in negotiating rooms is actually being implemented on the ground. And I think the second thing that I wanted to talk about was the intergenerational aspect that today's youth can bring to the table, keeping in mind that we are also thinking about the future that's not born yet. And it's really important to just not frame policies for the present generation, but also think about how it can benefit the future that is yet to come.
Absolutely. And on this last note, thank you for sharing it with us. We conclude our panel. I'm afraid, unfortunately, we will not have time for Q&A, which is a pity. But thank you for joining us. And I hope you got some key words, some key elements from the experience of these four extraordinary diplomats about what diplomacy is. Diplomacy is indeed something very interesting. It's about connecting. It's about representing your country. It can be also an opportunity for personal growth and for advancing in life. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists.